And now to the main event. It's Robert Frost's 150th birthday this month, which is pretty exciting. And we have Jay Parini's 16 poems to learn by heart as the tie to this event. And we're so grateful to the Vermont Bookshop who pitched us this idea, thought about this collaboration, to Michole Biancosino, who's an incredible director who just handpicked these amazing professional actors to be here tonight to share their poetry. And also to Clint Bierman right here. As well as to a grant for free arts programming that allowed everyone to come tonight without paying any money. And then, of course, there'll be free cake, so stick around for that. And thanks so much for coming. Enjoy the show. And I would like to introduce the amazing Jay Parini, who has written more than 20 books, screenplays, all types of books. And we'll be adding some context to tonight's event. And of course, his book is the main event as well. And Vermont Bookshop is here selling his books. He'll be happy to give you his autograph. So definitely stick around for that as well. So I'll turn it over to Jay Parini.
Out, I was told. There, better like this. Well, hi, everybody. Glad to be here. I've been told to sit here in this chair like King Tut. And and I'll basically be on the stage, and I'll watch these actors and come up and recite Robert Frost. And then after about 3 or 4 of the poems, I've got a little program here. I'm going to make some remarks, brief remarks, tell a little story. And then at the end, I'll thank the actors, and then I'll open it up for about 10 to 15 minutes of question and answers. And then we will celebrate Mr. Frost's 150th with a birthday cake. So I'm really excited. I'm, first of all, thrilled that so many friends and neighbors have come out. It's great to see old friends. And this crowd is full of old friends, so that's very heartwarming to me. So thank you for coming, for Frost especially. Our great Vermont poet, great American poet. I persist in believing that Frost is the greatest American poet of the 20th century. And so we're very lucky to have him hovering like a ghost over this valley. I believe that Frost is here, always. I never walk up in Breadloaf Mountain without feeling like he's around the corner or peeping from behind a tree or something. And every once in a while, I think I see him in the Middlebury College library looking through a book of molds or something. He often did that. He would look through a book of molds. So God knows why molds so well. But Frost was an eccentric SOB, difficult man, but marvelous. And he really had why I was happy to do this book when the Library of America invited me was, I said, well, Frost is the most memorable of American poets. And he had a way of writing poetry that was, Auden defined poetry as memorable language. And one can't imagine poems that stick in your brain more like glue more than Robert Frost. I mean, these poems just stay with you, and you can recite them all night long in your sleep, whatever. And they'll be with you forever. Well, we'll talk about that in a bit. But let's just go right to it. We're going to begin with the great Mending Wall.
Mending wall. Something there is that doesn't love a wall, that sends the frozen ground swell under it and spills the upper boulders in the sun, and makes gaps even two can pass abreast. The work of hunters is another thing. I have come after them and made repair where they have left not one stone on a stone, but they would have the rabbit out of hiding to please the yelping dogs. The gaps I mean, no one has seen them made or heard them made, but at spring mending time, we find them there. I let my neighbor know beyond the hill, and on a day we meet to walk the line and set the wall between us once again. We keep the wall between us as we go, to each the boulders that have fallen to each, And some are loaves, and some are so nearly balls we have to use a spell to make them balance. Stay where you are until our backs are turned. We wear our fingers rough with handling them. Oh, just another kind of outdoor game, one on a side. It comes to little more. There where it is we do not need the wall. He is all pine, and I am all apple orchard. My apple trees will never get across and eat the cones under his pines, I tell him. He only says, good fences make good neighbors. Spring is the mischief in me, and I wonder if I could put a notion in his head. Why do they make good neighbors? Isn't it where there are cows, but here there are no cows? Before I built a wall, I'd ask to know what I was walling in or walling out, and to whom I was like to give offense. Something there is that doesn't love a wall, that wants it down. I could say elves to him, but it's not elves exactly, and I'd rather he said it for himself. I see him there, bringing a stone grasped firmly by the top in each hand, like an old stone savage armed. He moves in darkness, as it seems to me, not of woods only and the shade of trees. He will not go behind his father's saying, and he likes having thought of it so well, he says it again. Good fences make good neighbors.
Thank you, Michole. You know, I've heard that poem, I've read it myself probably 1,000 times, over 50 years, maybe 60 years. And I think I read it when I was first in high school in Scranton, Pennsylvania. Unlikely place to be reading a poem by Frost. But, and I've always sort of changed my mind about what it means. That's the thing about Frost. His poems won't stay in one place as far as meaning goes. They keep shifting. For years and years, probably several decades, I was convinced this was a poem against people who believe in building walls. And he talks about the neighbor like an old stone savage armed, those walking like this, and who says almost nothing but, good fences make good neighbors. You know, it seems pretty awful. But then the more I read the poem, the more I see that Frost, first of all, it is a wall itself. If you look at it on the page, it's a perfect wall of poetry. Stone on stone, word on word, aloft in the air, a perfect example of blank verse. Blank verse is the main form of poetry writing in the English language. Most of Shakespeare is in blank verse, right? Milton's Paradise Lost is in this unrhymed iambic pentameter that we call blank verse. Blank verse isn't, I once asked the class at Middlebury, who understands what blank verse is? And a student said, Professor, isn't that poetry where there's no meaning in it? I said, no, that's not what it means. No, sorry about that. Blank, not blank in that way. But now I realize that the poem is, more and more I've been thinking it's a poem about how, remember it's Frost who summons his neighbor every year to mend the wall, to walk along it. And this is how civilization is created. People playing with each other, working with each other. And Frost was a classicist. He knew the word mend, mending wall. This is the work of creating civilization. It's about making amends. It's about mending community. It's about creating community by doing the work of keeping the properties the way they should be upheld. But it's working together, and so it's mending wall. One little anecdote about this poem I never forget. I think my finest teaching moment was with this poem. About 20 years ago, I was teaching my Frost seminar to seniors at the college, and I always had the final class at the Frost cabin. And I got the key from it and got it all set up. I went up to the Frost cabin. Actually, I went up the night before with a boom box, and I put it behind the couch. And I had one of those remotes in my pocket. And so we sat around on the floor, and I sat in a chair like this with the students around my knees. And they thought I was probably Robert Frost come back. And I said, you know, and I talked as I can sometimes in a seminar. I went 1 hour. 2 hours passed. We're well into our third hour of my talking. about Robert Frost, and I hadn't turned any lights on in the cabin, and it had gotten absolutely pitch black, and the students are too nervous to say, "Professor, do you think maybe we should turn a light on?" And I said, "You know, sometimes when it gets this dark in this cabin, the ghost of Robert Frost puts in an appearance." And I reached into my pocket and I pressed the remote. And behind the couch yelled, "Something there is that doesn't love a wall." And I swear to God, the girl sitting right in front of me, poor thing, a senior, pissed her pants. A big puddle on the floor of the Frost cabin. It really happened. And I just figured that was my supreme moment as a teacher. I mean, if I could get a student to piss her pants, I've done my work. So let's move on to the next poem now. Enough of that. Okay, let's move on to mowing.
Mowing. There was never a sound beside the wood but one, and that was my long scythe whispering to the ground. What was it whispered? I knew not well myself. Perhaps it was something about the heat of the sun, something, perhaps, about the lack of sound, and that was why it whispered and did not speak. It was no dream of the gift of idle hours, or easy gold at the hand of fay or elf. Anything more than the truth would have seemed too weak to the earnest love that laid the swale in rows, not without feeble-pointed spikes of flowers, pale orchises, and scared a bright green snake. The fact is the sweetest dream that labor knows. My long scythe whispered and left the hay to make.
The sound of trees. I wonder about the trees. Why do we wish to bear forever the noise of these more than another noise so close to our dwelling place? We suffer them by the day until we lose all measure of pace and fixity in our joys and acquire a listening air. They are that talks of going but never gets away, and that talks no less for knowing as they grow older and wiser that now it means to stay. My feet tug at the floor. My head sways to my shoulder sometimes when I watch trees sway from the window or the door. I shall set forth for somewhere. I shall make the reckless choice someday when they are in voice and tossing so as to scare the white clouds over the lawn. I shall have less to say, but I shall be gone.
Reluctance. Out through the fields and the woods, and over the walls I've wended. I've climbed the hills of view, and looked at the world and descended. I've come by the highway home, and lo, it is ended. The leaves are all dead on the ground, save those that the oak is keeping. To ravel them one by one, and let them go scraping and creeping out over the crusted snow when others are sleeping. And the dead leaves lie huddled and still, no longer blown hither and thither. The last lone aster is gone. The flowers of the witch hazel wither. The heart is still aching to seek, but the feet question whither. When to the heart of man was it ever less than a treason to go with the drift of things, to yield with a grace to reason, and bow and accept the end of a love or a season?
The road not taken. Two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both and be one traveler. Long I stood and looked down one as far as I could to where it bent in the undergrowth. Then took the other as just as fair and having perhaps the better claim, because it was grassy and wanted wear. Though as for that, for the passing there wore them equally about the same, and both that morning equally lay in leaves, no step had trodden black. Oh, I kept the first for another day, yet, knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. I shall be telling this with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference.
Thank you, Jeremy. That was lovely. I mean, that's a poem we all kind of know, don't we? It's in the American psyche. Even people who don't know anything about poetry somehow know that poem. And I remember one of my high school teachers, Alberta Mayer, had handwritten out and framed in glass and behind her desk at the high school, it said, two roads diverged in a wood and I took the road less traveled by. And that made all the difference. And she said, class, I want you to take this to heart. March to the beat of a different drummer. Be your own person. As we say now in the 60s, do your own thing. That's what this poem means. And I thought, well, that's good. And then I started reading the poem. And I thought, but I don't get it. I don't get it, right? I like these two roads diverged in the yellow wood. And sorry, I can't be one traveler, travel both. Long I stood down, looked down one as far as I could to where it bent in the undergrowth, then took the other as just as fair. In case you didn't get it. And as for that, the passing there had worn them really about the same. Second time we're told there's no difference. Then the third stanza begins, for those who are really dumb like me, and both that morning equally lay in leaves no step had trodden black. Okay, what the hell's going on here? These two roads are absolutely the same, right? Oh, I kept the first for another day, yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. And then the ending, I think this is crucial here. I shall be telling this with a sigh. That is the most problematic sigh in American literature. And I suddenly realized what this sigh is about after 1,000 readings of this poem. This is the narrator Frost is saying, I know that when I'm an old man and my grandchildren gather around my knee, I'm there right now, by the way, 4 grandchildren, I know that I will be a lying son of a bitch. And I'll say, "Yeah, Grandpappy Robert Frost was a poet. He took the road less traveled. He was a marvelous man. He was an eccentric. He always did his own thing. But I'll know in my heart of hearts," Frost is speaker saying, "I know that I'll be lying, because these are the masks we put on as we get older. We want to revise our history. We want to be able to say, 'Two roads diverged in a wood, and I, Robert Frost, your grandfather, I took the road less traveled by.'" And that has made all the difference. I remember it was a few years ago, actually 20 years ago, a friend invited me to a meeting of the Italian American Society in Washington, D.C. And because I'm Italian American, I went to this thing. And the guy sitting next to me, I said, "Hi, Jay Parini." He said, "Oh, I'm Yogi Berra." I said, "Are you the Yogi Berra?" He said, "Which one would that be?" I said, "The one with the catcher's mitt." "That's me." I said, "Mr. Berra, I'm so pleased to meet you. You were a childhood hero of mine." And I said, "I was just teaching the Robert Frost poem, 'The Road Not Taken,' at Middlebury College, and I quoted you." He said, "You quoted me in a college class? What did you have me say?" I said, "Well, if you come to a fork in the road, take it." He said, "Well, Jay," he said, "I may have said that or may not have." He said, "If I had $1 for everything they said I said, I'd be a millionaire." A millionaire. He said, "I don't read much poetry. I only read the one poet that I like, Phil Rizzuto." And he said, "Well, let me ask you a question. Who the hell was Robert Frost?" I said, "You never heard of Robert Frost?" "No." He said, he said, "Is he up there with Phil as a poet? Phil the Scooter, Rizzuto?" I said, "Yeah, I guess they're on a par." Well, okay, let's move on to Storm Fear. Storm Fear.
Storm fear. When the wind works against us in the dark and pelts with snow the lower chamber window on the east and whispers in a sort of stifled bark the beast, "Come out, come out." It costs no inward struggle not to go. No. I count our strength, 2 and a child. Those of us not asleep, subdued to mark how the cold creeps as the fire dies at length. How drifts are piled, dooryard and road ungraded, till even the comforting barn grows far away. And my heart owns a doubt whether 'tis in us to arise with the day and save ourselves unaided.
Putting in the seed. You come to fetch me from my work tonight, when supper's on the table, and we'll see if I can leave off burying the white, soft petals from the apple tree. Soft petals, yes, but not so barren quite, mingled with these, smooth bean and wrinkled pea. And go with you, ere you lose sight of what you came for and become like me. Slave to a springtime passion for the earth. How love burns through the putting in the seed and on through the watching for that early birth, when just as soil tarnishes with weed, the sturdy seedling with arched body comes, shouldering its way and shedding the earth crumbs. Stopping by woods on a snowy evening. Whose woods these are, I think I know. His house is in the village, though. He will not see me stopping here to watch his woods fill up with snow. My little horse must think it queer to stop without a farmhouse near, between the woods and frozen lake, the darkest evening of the year. He gives his harness bells a shake to ask if there is some mistake. The only other sounds the sweep of easy wind and downy flake. The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep and miles to go before I sleep. And miles to go before I sleep.
Thank you so much. That is such a gorgeous poem. I mean, this is it. Frost, in fact, he wrote that poem one night when he was living near Bennington at the Stone House, 1928, and he had an idea for a poem. And he started after dinner at 6 o'clock, sent the kids to bed, told his wife, Eleanor, don't anybody disturb me, a poem is coming on. and everybody cleared the house, and Frost started writing. He wrote all through the night, never slept, all through the night. By the end of the morning, he had 897 words, lines, an epic, the longest poem he'd ever written. He finished it when the sun came up at 7 o'clock in the winter, and he looked at it and he says, "This poem is terrible." And he crumpled up the whole poem and put it in the wood stove and burned it. And then he was so depressed that he had spent all night writing this poem, and he went out on the porch. It was chilly, and he had his little notebook with him, and in 10 minutes he wrote, "Whose woods these are, I think I know. His house is in the village, though. He will not see me stopping here to watch his woods fill up with snow. My little horse must think it queer to stop without a farmhouse near. Between the woods and frozen lake, the darkest evening of the year, he gives his harness bell a shake to ask if there is some mistake. The only other sounds the sweep, my favorite lines, of easy wind and downy flake. The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep and miles to go before I sleep. But still I wonder why I weep." No, that line sucks. He tried like 25 times to come up with a final line after and miles to go before. And Eleanor finally came down for breakfast and she said, "Robert, you've been up all night writing." He said, "Eleanor, I've got this poem. I can't get a last line." She looked at it. She said, "Well, just repeat the one before it." She said, "If you get a line that good, just say it again." I've been doing that through my whole marriage. Yeah. Get a good line, I just keep it going. You know, I remember this poem turned me on to Frost. I was a 15-year-old, 9th grade in Scranton High School, West Scranton Senior High, 9th grader. And my teacher, Miss Ann Morris, one day said, "Jay, here's something for you. I want you to take this poem home." She gave me a little book of poems by Frost. "Take this home and write a paper over the weekend on this poem, Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening." I thought, I'm ruined. My life has come to an end. And I took it home and I read it, sitting in my little house in Scranton, and it was those lines, "The only other sounds the sweep of easy wind and downy flake." I was amazed. I said, how does a person do that with language? I can remember just a few years ago, I was invited back to Scranton to dedicate the new art center there, and I was the speaker, and keynote speaker, the only speaker, and I stood up there, big crowd, 250 people. And I said, I got my start with Robert Frost here in Scranton. I was a 9th grader, and a little old lady with lots of blue hair said to me, Jay, I want you to read this poem by Frost and write about it. And suddenly there's a woman standing up in the audience. And I thought that was unusual. I said, yes, you have a question? She said, Jay, I'm Ann Morris. I was 24 years old. I was so embarrassed, I said to me, I was 14, you look like an old lady to me. So, what are you going to do, right? Went to the heart of man. Okay, well, let's move on to what one critic has said, called, a great critic, Robert Graves, said, this is probably the most frightening poem in the English language, Design.
Design. I found a dimpled spider, fat and white, on a white heel-all, holding up a moth like a white piece of rigid satin cloth. Assorted characters of death and blight, mixed ready to begin the morning rite, like the ingredients of a witch's broth. A snowdrop spider, a flower like a froth, and dead wings carried like a paper kite. What had that flower to do with being white? The wayside blue and innocent heel-all. What brought the kindred spider up to that height, then steered the white moth thither in the night? What but design of darkness to appall, if design govern in a thing so small?
That was beautiful. Yeah, that poem is, that is a terrifying poem. What but design of darkness to appall? And Frost, remember, was a Latinist. He studied Latin at Harvard and at Dartmouth. And he knew the word appall from appellare, which in Latin means to make white. And so you got to read Frost. Never think he's just a country bumpkin. I mean, he understands the roots of every word, and it's all delicately layered, and the meanings radiate and radiate. He was, as you know, the king of breadloaf. He founded the Writers' Conference there in 1927, when we inherited this land, the college, and hundreds of acres. And the president was having dinner with Robert Frost and said, Mr. Frost, we've just inherited all of this land from Joseph Patel. What do we do? Frost said, let's make a writers' conference in an English school. And so they did. And Frost made sure, and Frost had, that was 1927, Frost was renting the Homer Noble farm, which he bought in 1938, and then lived there till his death in 1963, the Homer Noble farm. And he would come down, he always insisted on being the last poet to read at the Writers' Conference. You ended with Robert Frost. And Frost would come out and give a reading, and he always ended with the same poem. Some say the world will end in fire, some say in ice. From what I've tasted of desire, I hold with those who favor fire. But if I had to perish twice, I think I know enough of hate to say that for destruction, ice is also great and would suffice. And there was, this woman told me, a few years ago, she said, I was there though in 1954 when he read that. And there was thunderous applause. And Frost blew out through the west doors and walked down the little slope there, was standing by the big hedgerow, and he was smoking a cigarette, looking up at the stars. And I went up to him and I said, Mr. Frost, I'm a Middlebury student, a senior. Could I ask you a question? He said, what? A question? She said, Mr. Frost, yes. Go ahead, what? She said, Mr. Frost, that last poem you read, Fire and Ice, what does it mean? He said, What does it mean? Here's what it means, darling. Some say the world will end in fire. He recited the whole poem to her and said, now go on your way. Frost did not like critics. He once said, all a critic does is take my poems and put them in worse language. So, I'm going to talk about Frost a little bit, then we'll thank the actors, okay? We'll talk. I've been doing Frost for quite a while. I've written actually, 30 books, but Frost's biography is the one that I feel closest to in some strange way because I've followed him my whole life, read him, thought about him. I can't get him out of my head. He kind of hovers over my shoulder. It all started seriously when I got my first job. I was 25 years old. This is 50 years ago. As an instructor at Dartmouth College, and my office was right next to the rare books room. And I went in there the first day I was there. I had the whole summer before me, so I thought, what am I going to do? And I sat there for about 2 days alone in my office, looking around. Then I went down the hallway, and there's a man sitting there, and I said, his name was Jack Reed. I said, Jack, what do you got here? Anything interesting? He said, yeah, we were just given the Frost notebooks and letters. And he takes me into a back room, and there's 1,000 letters of Frost, to and from Frost, and there's hundreds of notebooks. And I thought, well, this could be a good project. I love Robert Frost. And I kind of sat down to read, and I just kept reading. I worked for 25 years on that book, and reading Frost letters. And I went down to the Amherst College Robert Frost library, where they have hundreds of hours of Frost talking, tapes. He was an amazing speaker. And so I actually had those transcribed. And I actually had sent to my house 100 little cassette tapes with all of Frost talking on it. My kids went nuts because they said whenever we went on a car trip that we had to listen to that old man talking. But I learned a lot. Listening, Frost was great in talking. Between his poems, he said so much. You learn a tremendous amount about the man when you hear him talking between poems. He was kind of witty, wise. He was difficult. He was never an easy man. There's the famous breadloaf story when he was jealous of other poets. He hated Archibald MacLeish, he thought he was a fake poet. He would say, I hate that fake poet, Archie MacLeish. And MacLeish was invited to give the final reading at Breadloaf one summer by Ted Morrison. Frost was beside himself with fury. And so Frost went with his newspaper to the New York Times, sat in the front row, and MacLeish comes up and starts reading, and Frost takes the newspaper, and one by one he starts crumpling the pages loudly. And he builds a little pyramid beside him of these New York Timeses. And when Archie MacLeish gets to his most famous poem called Ars Poetica, which has the line, a poem should not mean but be, which Frost always says was the worst line written in American literature. When MacLeish got to that line, Frost took out his match and lit the newspaper. And it went up like flames, and Frost turned around and he goes, fire! Everybody ran out of the building, Frost roaring with laughter. And then outside, Archie MacLeish was just trembling with rage, and Frost was standing there next to him. And I got this from Ted Morrison, who was standing next to him. And Ted said that Archie said to him, Robert, you're a very good poet, but you're a very bad man. And Frost said, yeah, Archie, with you, it's the other way around. So you don't want to get in Frost's way. You don't want to get in Frost's way. So let's do a few questions. Then, well, first of all, thank you to the actors. Thank you. Stand and take a bow. Hooray! Yeah, turn the lights out. That was really very memorable. Well, let's take 10 minutes here. Who's got a question? Greg, your hand's up already. Yes, Greg.
Well, to those of you who haven't read Jay's magnificent Frost biography, please do. It's wonderful. I've mostly forgotten, Jay, everything I learned in my Middlebury College English classes. But I seem to recall that there's a line between Ralph Waldo Emerson and Frost.
Mm-hmm.
I think of Emerson as a transcendentalist.
Mm-hmm.
But I realize I don't quite know what that means and how Frost might fit into
Well, I can say something about that, yeah. Well, Frost, in 1958, toward the end of his life, Frost wrote a wonderful essay called On Emerson. And he said he was tired of being called an Emersonian. He said he didn't want to be identified with that cheerful monist. Frost was, on some level, a transcendentalism. Transcendentalism goes back to Emerson and Thoreau, Emily Dickinson, Walt Whitman, and a whole circle of philosophers in the Cambridge part of New England back in the mid-19th century. And Frost really defined transcendentalism in his famous little book, called Nature, published in 1838. And Nature. And he says there, nature is the symbol of the spirit. All natural facts are signs of spiritual facts. And he develops a theory he calls correspondences. So there's, of course, every time you see a tree or a bush or a cloud, it's really a very thin break between spiritual reality and physical mental reality. So transcendentalism was the effort to break through the physical, to go beyond metaphysical, beyond the physical, into the spiritual realm. Frost once said, "My goal as a poet is to penetrate deeper and deeper and deeper in the spirit, to penetrate deeper and deeper and deeper into matter." So Frost thought about Emerson, transcendentalism. His mother, he came by it honestly. His mother was a Scottish woman, Isabel Moody Frost, and she was born and raised in Scotland as a Swedenborgian. And Frost was himself raised a Swedenborgian. Emanuel Swedenborg was the late 17th, early 18th century Swedish mystic, right? And he actually developed the theory of correspondences, the mystical connection between spirit and nature. And so Emerson simply took that theory and developed it. But then I think he didn't want to be identified as the cheerful monist. He wanted to say, in Frost, there's something about Frost which is deeper than that, in many ways more grounded. And I think that comes from Frost's connection to pragmatism. When he was at Harvard in 1898-9, he studied with, his philosophy there was run by two guys, C.S. Peirce, and the person that most influenced Frost was Henry James's brother, William James. And Frost always kept by his bed table James's lovely book called The Will to Believe. And he believed that there's, in life, two kinds of people, tender-hearted and tough-minded. And he liked to find the balance between the Emersonian tender heart and the pragmatist William James's tough mind. And it's that balance in Frost, because there's a cynical edge in Frost, too. And I think it's that uniqueness. You wouldn't get a poem like Design written by Ralph Waldo Emerson. It would scare the bejesus out of him. And Frost, you look at poems even like, all of his poems are in many ways about this tug of war back and forth between the mind and the sky, between pragmatism and transcendentalism. Think of, say, birches, right? You know, when my mind, I go out into the woods when my life is too much like a pathless wood, right? That's when I want to go back to the woods and I want to climb a birch tree like a boy. And I want to go right up to the top. But he said, no, let no fate willfully misunderstand me and sweep me away. No, that's taking transcendentalism maybe a step too far. He says, I want to go back to earth a while. Then the greatest lines in that poem, earth's the right place for love. I don't know where it's likely to go better. Earth's the right place for love. So that's the greatness in Frost. And it's the spiritual complexity, mental and spiritual complexity. And it's the agility, Greg, moving between the transcendentalist wish, hope, and the pragmatist's grounding in earth, which is the right place for love. So there's a little sense of that. Timmy, you have your hands up.
Actually, thank you. This is so interesting, and I feel as if I'm sitting in front of Robert Frost. Thank you.
You are, yeah.
I have two questions that are related, I think.
Okay.
One is, I want to hear something about his politics.
His politics.
And right, this on nature, I will not take him, which road.
Yeah.
So a little bit about politics, but also, I also want to know about his relationship
Rabbi Reichert, yeah.
And sort of his view of Judaism. Because
Yeah.
in Israel, he is, at least when I was in high school, not very much liked. So if you can, it might be
Yeah.
connected. It might not be connected to you.
Well, I once did hear Netanyahu on the radio say, "We're building a wall here because good friends make good neighbors." How did that work out? But Frost, Frost was his best friend at Middlebury was, you're right, Rabbi Victor Reichert. And when I first got to Middlebury over 40 years ago, I was introduced to Rabbi Reichert, who was still living in a little house in the woods up near Breadloaf. And so I had many dinners with Rabbi Reichert, Victor, who was a great, terrific man. And I once at dinner said to him, "So what do you make of Frost's religious?" They talked about religion, he said, all the time. I said, what do you think about Frost and religion? And Frost, I knew, did once go and speak to Rabbi Reichert's synagogue in Ohio. He said, well, Frost told me he was an Old Testament Christian, an Old Testament Christian. And I said to Rabbi Reichert, what the hell is that? What did he mean? He said, well, he explained it to me. He said, I'm a follower of that little young rabbi from the town of Nazareth, who was a Jew and who really knew the scriptures. And by the scriptures, he only meant the Hebrew scriptures. And he said, the similarities between Judaism and Christianity are absolute. They're profound, Frost said to Reichert. He said, think of it. What did his disciples asked him, what is the basis of what we're doing here? What are we all about as Christians? And Jesus said, there are only two commandments. Love God and love your neighbor as yourself. And Frost said to Reichert, and where do you think you got that from? Love God with your whole heart, your whole soul, your whole mind. That's the basis of any Jewish service of any kind. You begin with the Shema, Israel, Adonai. Okay? That's called the Shema. And that is what you say. I will love the Lord, my God, Adonai, Elohim, with all my heart, my soul, and my mind. That's the core. And also, which is of course, the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 6. And then, love your neighbor as yourself. That's right from the Bible. Is from Leviticus, the 39th chapter of Leviticus, Frost. Frost always knew chapter and verse. He told Rabbi Reichert, it's chapter 39 of Leviticus. Love thy neighbor as thyself. So Jesus was profoundly Jewish, profoundly supported these two ideas. And Frost did. He said, love God, Shema Israel, hear, O Israel, and love thy neighbor as thyself. I mean, Frost was, I think, profoundly religious. He was kind of a nature mystic, but he read the Bible, mostly the Old Testament. He preferred it. He loved the stories. He loved the language. And so that was Frost's religion. His politics were tricky. Frost, there's a wonderful film of Frost giving a talk. I show it to my classes all the time. And he says in this talk, he says, now, this is 1960, during the presidential race between Kennedy and Nixon. He said, well, you're all asking me about where I stand on this election, and I'm a Democrat. He said, I've been a Democrat my whole life, and I never will change. I'll always be a Democrat. But he said, I will tell you that I have not been so happy ever since Harding left, since 1897. So it's been going downhill, the Democratic Party. So he wasn't happy. And he was very much, if you look at his poems, two poems, if you want to think about Frost politics, I would look at. First of all, I think Two Tramps in Mud Time is the great Depression era thing. Two tramps come out of the mud. They have no money, and Frost is there delightfully chopping up his wood, and they want to take his work for pay. And Frost knows, damn it, I want to chop this wood, but I got to give these guys a few bucks to chop this. I know the situation. He says he knows that there's this need, and he's doing it for love. And he said when there's a tug of war between love and need, he says, I know that need is always, as it should, going to win out. Nevertheless, he says in that ending, only where love and need are one is the deed ever really done for heaven and the future's sake. Oh my God. And then a poem of his that never gets mentioned, and Provide, Provide. This was also written right at the beginning, in the middle of the Depression. And Frost didn't like the New Deal, but he was obsessed with the idea of providing. He was a Latinist. Providere, he would say before he would read this poem. Comes from provide, providere in Latin, and it means many things, but it also means to provide for the community. We must somehow, our job is to provide in every way we can, spiritually, mentally, materially. Provide, provide. And that poem is withering. The witch that came, that withered hag, to clean the steps, to wash the steps with pail and rag, was once the beauty Abishag. Too many fall from great and good for you to doubt the likelihood. Die early and avoid the fate. Or if predestined to die late, make up your mind to die in state. Make the whole stock exchange your own. If need be, occupy a throne where nobody can call you crone. Better to go down dignified with boughten friendship at your side than none at all. Provide, provide. That poem for me passes the envy test. It is so great. Well, one more brief question anybody have? Then we really want to, please, Michael, we'll end.
Thank you, Jay. It's wonderful to be with you. I recall a few years back, perhaps a decade ago, a bunch of our local young people, teenagers, vandalized the Robert Frost cabin.
Yeah.
And that was bad news. And then I read the verdict, which really astonished me. And the judge, and please remind us who that was, issued this verdict that these teenagers, who were of course found culpable of vandalizing this wonderful place, would have to spend a seminar, would have to do a seminar with you.
Yes. Well, what happened was a guy was hiking down the trail up near the Frost cabin one day in the winter, and he smelled burning. And he went and saw the Frost house had a wall burned out of it, and the place was trashed. He called the cops. They came up. Somebody had a party, had tried to warm themselves up and burned down one wall. They'd burned Frost's actual books in the fireplace to warm up. When I heard on the radio, I was devastated. I was so sad. And then one of the people, it turned out to be a bunch of local teenagers. 30 of them had a big beer party, and one of them he was with his girlfriend up in Frost's bed, and he dropped his license on the floor. So you didn't have to be Inspector Poirot to solve this crime. And so they rounded them up to high school. They rounded up all 30 of them, brought them into court, and the judge said, okay, you guys, we have you for arson, destroying a public property, and invading a national treasure place, and so forth. I could put you in jail for 30 years for this. But she called me the night before. She said, Professor Parini, you don't know me, but how about we try some poetic justice here? And she said, I'll offer them that they can go to jail or they can take a course with you on Robert Frost. Actually, one of the teenagers said in the courtroom, I'd rather go to jail. So he went to jail for 24 hours. He changed his mind, decided to study with me. So I went over, I'd met them many times in the courtroom, and we went through Frost's poetry. We met over here in the courtroom, and I walked into the room, and all these kids sitting there, pimply faced, baseball caps on backwards. and this girl in the front row, I said, all right, did any of you people even know who Robert Frost was? And I pointed to this girl, you. She said to me, I know who Abraham Lincoln was. I said, well, you're close, but we'll take it from there. So yeah, it's an amazing story. Yes. Well, listen, thank you all for your time. Thank you for coming.
Thanks so much, Jay and everyone. Books are for sale out in the lobby, and Jay will be signing them over here, and then we're about to unveil the cake, so don't leave.